This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so our topic today is Everyone Serves Families with Young Children, and this presentation is actually part of the Family Literacy Grant that we get through New York State. And this is the final training for this grant cycle. So there are a couple of people here who are supposed to be here because they went through the grant training over the past year or so. And this is one of the two training opportunities that we opened up for all library staff. It's an interesting topic. So this one was actually supposed to be in person, and we had a really cool brain architecture game that we were supposed to play. And we can't do that, obviously. So I've kind of tried to adapt the presentation a little bit. So we still talk about the important things that we're supposed to talk about, but I also have a little bit of stuff on COVID-19 and how children are handling stress. So it's a little bit more relevant to our current situation. But I wanted to start out with talking about brain architecture. And when I first did this presentation, it was a year ago now, I did a lot of research and I found really cool stuff. So the first thing that I found is that brains are built over time from the bottom up, which makes a lot of sense because you weren't born just knowing how to read or how to write or speak or pretty much do anything except for cry. So it takes time to build up the brain architecture and strengthen neurons. So obviously that doesn't happen overnight, it takes years. Second, brain architecture is comprised of billions of connections between individual neurons across different areas of the brain. And this just kind of blows my mind to think about the fact that our brain is connected by all these little electricity things sparking and firing. It's very cool, and the brain gets built when these connections between the neurons are strengthened. And so you learn to read by practicing, right? You learn to swim by practicing. And each time you practice, it kind of strengthens these connections. And actually, I never really thought about this until a couple of years ago. My grandmother had a stroke, and her whole left side of the body was paralyzed for a while, and she had to relearn how to do things like use a fork and use a spoon. Just by practicing, she was able to strengthen the neural connections and was able to relearn how to do this stuff. So it's also interesting to think about in terms of that. So the third thing was that the combination of genes and experiences shape the brain. So that kind of brings in the whole nature versus nurture thing. Nature is kind of the gene aspect where we get what we get in terms of genetics, and experience is the nurture part on how we experience the world, who helps shape it for us, and along those lines. So the brain is really cool, and I found this pretty interesting video that explains a lot of this very well. So I'm going to share this now.
Science tells us that the experiences we have in the first years of our lives actually affect the physical architecture of the developing brain. This means that brains aren't just born, they're also built over time based on our experiences. Just as a house needs a sturdy foundation to support the walls and roof, a brain needs a good base to support all future development. Positive interactions between young children and their caregivers literally build the architecture of the developing brain. Building a sturdy foundation in the earliest years provides a good base for a lifetime of good mental function and better overall health. So just how is a solid brain foundation built and maintained in a developing child? One way is through what brain experts call serve and return interactions. Imagine a tennis match between a caregiver and a child, but instead of hitting a ball back and forth across the net, various forms of communication pass between the two, from eye contact to touch, from singing to simple games like peekaboo. These interactions, repeated throughout a young person's developing years, are the bricks that build a healthy foundation for all future development. But another kind of childhood experience shapes brain development too, and that's stress. Good kinds of stress, like meeting new people or studying for a test, are healthy for development because they prepare kids to cope with future challenges. Another kind of stress, called toxic stress, is bad for brain development. If a child is exposed to serious ongoing hardships like abuse and neglect, and he has no other caregiver in his life to provide support, the basic structures of his developing brain may be damaged. Without a sturdy foundation to properly support future development, he is at risk for a lifetime of health problems, development issues, even addiction. It's possible to fix some of the damage of toxic stress later on, but it's easier, more effective, and less expensive to build solid brain architecture in the first place. One of the things that sturdy brain architecture supports is the development of basic emotional and social skills, an important group of skills which scientists call executive function and self-regulation can be thought of like air traffic control in the child's mental airspace. Think of a young child's brain as the control tower at a busy airport. All those planes landing and taking off and all of the support systems on the ground simultaneously demand the controller's attention to avoid a crash. It's the same with a young child learning to pay attention, plan ahead and remember, and follow lots of rules. Like all of us, kids have to react to things happening in the world around them, while also dealing with worries, temptations, and obligations on their mind. As these demands for attention pile up, air traffic control helps a child regulate the flow of information, prioritize tasks, and above all, find ways to manage stress and avoid mental collisions along the way. Having this ability is a necessity for positive and level mental health. Developing effective air traffic control, overcoming toxic stress, and building solid brain architecture are things kids can't do on their own. And since strong societies are made up of healthy, contributing individuals, it's up to us as a community to make sure all young people have the kinds of nurturing experiences they need for positive development. To build better futures, we need to build better brains.
So I really liked that video because I really like the end message that says it's not just up to like the parents or the child to build a really strong brain. It's up to the community. And as librarians, we're in a really unique position, much like teachers, where we are interacting with these kids from a very young age, and we can build these positive relationships and help manage things like toxic stress and really help them build a strong brain so that they are well prepared for whatever life throws at them. So one thing that I think is really important that I wanted to highlight from the video is serve and return. And serve and return interactions are really important, especially when children are very young, because they can help shape brain architecture. So the serve and return interactions are kind of like practicing. So like when a baby talks to you in baby language and you kind of talk back, they're actually strengthening neurons that will help them develop language skills later on in life, which is pretty cool. So responsive relationships like this are expected. Children expect them, and they are essential for proper brain development. And the absence of serve and return interactions is a real threat to a child's development and well-being later on in life. But again, as librarians, we're in a really cool spot where we can actually teach adult caregivers how to strengthen these relationships and how to encourage their child's brain development. So I found a cool video. There's two more videos. This one is about serve and return, and I thought this was important because it shows an example of the still face experiment. And this experiment shows what happens when a child doesn't get serve and return interaction.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment that the mother did, where she sits down and she's playing with her baby, about a year of age, and she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her. This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this. And then she uses all of her ability to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions. They turn away. They feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing. It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation.
So the serve and return, you can see how important it is. Just within 2 minutes, that baby had a really strong negative reaction to her mother not responding to her. So I kind of thought that was a really good example to show how important these serve and return exercises are, and how much they can really affect a young child. And if a young child isn't receiving any attention, it can be really damaging. So my next slide, there we go. Toxic stress was something that I didn't really know about until I started researching this stuff. And basically, there's 3 different types of responses to stress. There's positive stress, which is like getting a shot or taking a test. And this kind of stress is considered positive because it helps people realize that they can overcome things, that just because something bad happens to them, they can get through it, and it can help them grow as a person. Tolerable stress is something a little bit more serious, like a broken arm, or maybe like the death of a loved one, where it is very, very much more stressful, but you can recover from it. You can heal from it mentally and physically, and it doesn't do too much damage to your health and mental being long term. Toxic stress is the really dangerous one, and that comes from chronic neglect or abuse. And toxic stress can actually cause developmental delays and later health problems, including heart disease, depression, and can lead to suicide. So one thing that I learned about is the ACEs test. And ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And these are potentially traumatic events that occur during childhood. So there's a test that psychologists have developed, and we're going to watch a video that goes into a little bit more detail about this. But basically, you can see the people who have more negative experiences in their lives have more mental and physical problems later on. So just a little bit of facts on this. About 61% of adults surveyed across 25 states reported they had experienced at least one type of ACE, or adverse childhood experience, and nearly 1 in 6 reported that they had experienced 4 or more, which is kind of incredible. So there was also data that came out that showed that up to 1.9 million cases of heart disease and 21 million cases of depression could have potentially been avoided by preventing ACEs, or these childhood experiences. So 21 million cases of depression is huge. So it's pretty clear that this toxic stress doesn't just affect us for a little bit and then go away. It can cause problems throughout our entire lives, which is kind of scary if you think about it. So I have the next video that's going to talk a little bit about toxic stress and this lady's fun. So here we go.
So let's say you're on an African safari. You can hear the unique sounds of the open lands, you can see giraffes off in the distance, and you can feel the warm breeze on your face. And then you turn around, and you see this. What do you do? So chances are, if you see a lion that's about to eat you, your body is going to respond in one of two ways: fight or flee. Essentially, your brain's automatic response to threat kicks in, and you feel a rush of adrenaline, and you prepare to either fight for your life or run like heck the other direction. And there's very little thought involved in this immediate response. And that's normal. It's a biological system that's adapted over time to help humans survive mortal peril. But what happens if that lion shows up at home every night? What if it's lurking around every corner of your neighborhood? What if suddenly nowhere feels safe? What happens to your body then? So these types of persistent, chronic, and intense experiences of threat result in what scientists call toxic stress. As the name implies, these long-lasting and repeated experiences of stress can result in toxic damage to the brain and the body. And over the past few decades, there's been extensive research done on the effects of these toxic stress experiences for the brain and body. So one pretty well-known series of studies done on this topic are the Adverse Childhood Experiences, or ACEs studies. In these studies, researchers asked over 17,000 adults about the types of adverse and stressful experiences they had had in their childhoods. And these experiences included things like abuse, neglect, mental illness, or substance use. So over 2/3 of study participants reported at least one adverse childhood experience, and 1 in 5 participants reported 3 or more adverse experiences. Then researchers correlated the number of adverse childhood experiences people reported to the number of health problems later in life, including things like alcoholism, mental illness, and heart disease. And here's the kicker: the more adverse childhood experiences people reported, the more severe and numerous their health problems were later in life. Now, here is where I give the caveat that this study is correlational in nature, and thus we can't really determine if and how these particular adverse experiences cause these later health outcomes. But I will say that this is one in a long series of studies that have found various physical and mental health problems related to early experiences of chronic stress. So some research with rats has found that sustained exposure to highly stressful situations can result in memory and learning impairments, as well as suppressed immune system functioning. And genetic research has found that exposure to chronic stress can actually change the way that your genes are expressed across your lifetime. And some research suggests that if pregnant women experience extreme stress during their pregnancy, that it can actually alter how their baby's stress regulation system develops. So the evidence is pretty clear that exposure to chronic and toxic stress early in life and really across the lifespan can be very detrimental to health and well-being. But it's important to note that not all children or people exposed to toxic stress will necessarily have health issues. So how do we decrease the stress that's experienced by children? So obviously, it's impossible to remove all experiences of stress from children's lives. And as I've discussed previously, it's actually beneficial for us to experience some stress. But I have a lot of ideas about how we as a society can reduce experiences of toxic stress for children, and I'm sure I'll get into them in future videos. But I'll start with something that's probably the most straightforward: relationships. It all starts and ends with relationships. Research has found that when children can rely on caring and responsive adults around them, that it lessens their biological response to stress. Children are able to cope with stress more effectively when caring adults are present, who can help teach them how to cope with those experiences. If young people can have one, just one caring adult who they can trust and rely on, then their experiences of stress can go from being toxic to being tolerable. Now, how we support parents and teachers and professionals to build those relationships with kids, yeah, that's a topic for a whole series of videos, so stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, I've been collecting stories from a lot of you about the people in your lives who make a positive difference and who you rely on when you feel hopeless. I've gotten some great responses to these questions, so many thanks to those of you who have already responded. If you haven't and you want to, take a crack at these 2 questions and submit them via Tumblr or Twitter with the hashtag BRGstory.
So I'm going to cut it off there because that's her Twitter plug. But what I really liked about this video is that she stresses that if just one person is in a child's life that can help them cope with stress and negative emotions, that can have a huge difference in a child's life from turning the stress from toxic stress into tolerable stress. And as librarians, yet again, we are in a position where we can do this. We see kids grow up in the library. I was a kid that grew up in the library. I mean, it happens all the time. You see these kids probably like once a week for years. So you can be that stable figure in a child's life that helps them cope with things, even if nobody else in their life is there for them. So I think libraries are in a really strong position to ensure a strong start for children in terms of the enrichment programs that we have in the library, the early literacy programs with family engagement. So we don't just teach children how to strengthen their neural connections, we also teach parents how they can do it at home. And I think that we're also in a really good position to connect youth to caring adults and activities. If we create partnerships in our communities with other community organizations, they can also act as mentors for children and be a positive role model. So the library is an important part of this because, one, librarians themselves can be that positive role model for children. And then two, we can also connect children with other people and other organizations who can also help with that. So that's a pretty powerful thing that we as librarians can do and that we can do in our community. So I wanted to talk a little bit about stress during COVID-19 because it's relevant right now. So younger children may be regressing and are probably in need of age-appropriate explanations of what's going on. Even though children may not be watching the news or listening to the radio and hearing exactly what's going on or even be able to understand it, they can still pick up on stress and negative emotions and tension. And they may be responding to that. On top of that, families with very young kids may need to be more socially isolated than others because very young kids don't know how to social distance or wear a mask for long periods of time. So there is a fact to consider that families who do have very young kids may feel a little bit more isolated than others at this time. I know this is early literacy, but since we're on the topic, I wanted to talk about tweens and teens a little bit too. So tweens are children who are generally motivated to do well in school right now most likely lack the executive functioning abilities to self-direct and schedule their own school time right now. So routine is very important for them. And executive functioning abilities include like the ability to plan, to focus, and their brains aren't there yet. So I think in this case, routine is very helpful. And also kids in this age group may be a little bit more reluctant to vocalize their worries and fears. So it's kind of a delicate age, right? Tweens, nobody really likes being a tween. In middle school ages are very awkward. But if you're having like tween programs where people can get together and talk online, this might be something to be aware of. They might not want to talk about it directly, but they are probably still worried about it, the current situation. And then teens, there's two facts that I found. Depression among teenagers may be on the rise as a result of physical distancing and missing events. I feel so bad for the seniors and high schoolers this year who had to miss prom, graduation, even regents testing. Like that just seems like a normal thing, and they missed out on it. And many of our teenagers are responding to the current situation by reporting a lack of energy, a loss of interest in hobbies that they previously enjoyed, and a generally low mood, which makes a lot of sense because if you're cut off from all your friends and can't really go anywhere, I think that's an appropriate response, especially since teenagers place so much value on friendship. And I know just personally, my brother is 16 and he's definitely a little bummed out that he doesn't get to go to school for the rest of the year. I mean, he doesn't like school necessarily as much, but he misses the social aspect and the normalcy of it. So it's important to remember that all of these age groups may be experiencing stress and showing responding to stress in different ways, and to keep that in mind. And like I said, I'm sorry, I know this is supposed to be early literacy, but I figured all of you don't just work with young children. So how do we help relieve stress during this time? One way is to encourage and promote programs and activities that encourage kids to get outside. I've seen a lot of libraries doing really cool things in this vein, such as story walks, which is basically you take a page of a picture book and you tape it along a path. So as parents and families walk down the path, they get to read the story, which is kind of cool. It gets them outside, it gets them exercising and reading, which is always good. I've also seen libraries promoting scavenger hunts where you might have seen this before, but a community decides to put something in their windows, such as a rainbow I've seen, or teddy bears, or stuff like that, and then families can go out and take a walk and see how many things they can find in people's windows. And I've seen some libraries also doing cool things with sidewalk chalk, where they encourage kids to either decorate the library's sidewalk or their own sidewalk, and they provide chalk. So these are like fun activities that get kids outside, get them thinking about things other than stressful situations, and might be a good idea to start promoting at your library. The second thing you can do is to encourage routine. It gives children a sense of consistency, and it can also really help parents. Because I know a lot of parents are struggling to balance the working from home versus raising their children. So that's very tough right now. So by encouraging routine, that could mean that if you're doing online programming or you're doing online story time, that you have it at the same time every week, because it generates a sense of normalcy, routine. They know to expect it at this time, and that can be very helpful, because when a lot of the world seems uncontrollable and uncertain, it helps to have things that you know are going to happen. Another thing that you can do is provide age-appropriate information about the coronavirus, how it spreads, and how to protect people from getting sick, such as wash your hands, don't touch your face, etc. So I've linked here to a great LibGuide that has a whole bunch of ebooks that are free, that are specifically about the coronavirus and specifically for children, and they're both in English and Spanish. There's titles. So this is a great resource that you can share, and it might help parents explain the situation to their children a little bit easier, and it's in a way that children can understand, and it's reading, which is always good. And another thing to think about is that it can be really important to provide stress relief opportunities for parents. I am not a parent. I have parents. I've talked to parents, and I think a lot of people are struggling right now, especially like the people with younger kids who may be more socially isolated and just feeling very alone. So if you can set up a community network, like a Facebook group or something like that, to help parents realize that they're not alone and that there's other parents who are having the same struggles right now, and just give them a place to talk, that can be really helpful, because just talking about things can sometimes make a big difference. And then also providing parents with positive feedback, that they are doing their best and they shouldn't feel like it's not enough right now. That can be also very helpful. So you can do that through like a social media post, a newsletter, just we know it's hard, you're doing the best you can, and that's okay. So I wanted to open up the discussion a little bit at this point and ask what you guys think. What else can you do to help relieve stress while kids can't come into the library? Are you doing any programs right now or promoting anything that might be helpful for other people to learn about? And we can unmute people at this point if there's anybody that wants to say anything.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Christina. I'm from Phoenicia Library. One of the things that we've been doing is that we're a really tiny community and a really small library where kind of everybody knows everybody. And I've been doing a Facebook Live read aloud activity every night, sort of like a bedtime story. And as the children pop on, they'll often just like send a little hi message. And so I've gotten a lot of feedback from parents that just that little hello and then talking about a story and reading together has been like the highlight of some of these kids' days, where they're feeling noticed and acknowledged and feel like they're interacting in a way, even though I can't see them. And it seems like it is a way that we're helping relieve some stress because they're feeling heard and connected.
Thank you for sharing that. That seems like a perfect example of something that is really helpful and important that you can do while the library building's shut. That's fantastic. And I love that you've gotten such great feedback on it.
Courtney, Susan R. says that their regular story time for Story Hour is getting more and more families as this goes on.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's always a good thing.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
This is Jan. At the Hurley Library, we're doing an online yoga for kids. And hopefully that will, yeah. But also the story time at night also, Phoenicia, is a wonderful idea, which we also do.
I really like the idea of doing yoga for kids because that's something that gets them moving and active, which I think can be really helpful, especially because everybody's supposed to stay inside. That's a great idea.
Oh, thank you. And I'm sorry if I interrupted someone. I couldn't hear.
Courtney, it's Kristen again. I don't know if this particular library is on the line, but there is a library in our system that's doing online story time, and they ask the parents ahead of time if they want their child's name to be said. So they have a list of names of children that they say hello to at the beginning of their story hours.
Oh, that's a great idea.
So if you're on the line, jump in and talk about that a little bit. But I think that's a wonderful idea. It's that sort of old school, for those of you who remember, romper room style, where they said goodbye to everybody, and they always had a list of names that they would say. So I think it's a nice connector.
Definitely, yeah. It goes back to that idea of being seen and heard. It's very important. Do we have anybody else, or we're ready to move on? All right. So how can library staff make a difference? Obviously, you are all already doing a great job from those comments. But here are some ideas. So some of these are geared more towards in-person contact, but I think a lot of them also translate really well to online interactions. So some ideas are to use simple language with children and give them extra time for processing. Their brains are still working hard to make those connections and learn. Just be kind and show empathy, which honestly I think is really good advice for everybody, not just kids. Also embrace diversity, seek knowledge and understanding. Develop an orientation procedure for new families. That's something that I really liked because when you go to a new place, it can be kind of intimidating if you don't know where things are and you're kind of scared to ask for help. So if you have a new family that signs up for library cards, it might be good to do just like an orientation procedure, a library walkthrough, so they feel more comfortable in the space and more comfortable coming to you with questions. And then you can assess spaces, policies, and procedures for family friendliness. I know this might be a little difficult as we think about reopening and think about all the new policies and procedures we're going to have in place. But if you can think about this at all, while also keeping people safe and socially distancing in your library, that could be kind of helpful. But I understand that the current library situation right now, and when we reopen may not be as family friendly as we want it to, just to keep everybody safe. And then finally, just be respectful and professional. Again, just generally good advice for everybody. And I want to talk about now how important parents are as an audience. So parents generally feel that libraries are important for their children. In a study, 94% of parents say that libraries are important, 79% describe libraries as very important, and that's especially true of parents of young children, those under 6. 84% of them say libraries are very important. So parents are a really important audience because obviously children cannot come to the libraries by themselves unless they live next door. And even then, if they're under 6, probably not. So to get the parents on board and realize how important the library is and how beneficial it can be for their child's development is really crucial, because the parents are the ones taking them to the library or logging them into Facebook to watch an online story time or a yoga class. So it's really important to think not just of the kids in this situation, but also how you can make the parents feel welcome, feel understood, and just generally feel like their family is welcome in the library. So parents are also more likely than other adults to use library services, and lower income parents are more likely to view library services as very important, which is great because they are. And parents are also more likely to be interested in expanding and using new library services. So that kind of ties back to what somebody said in the chat about how their story time is expanding online. So, that's parents who are looking for stuff to do and realize the library is a great resource. So I wanted to open it up for a little bit of discussion again. What can your library do to make library experiences easier for families with young children, both thinking into the future as the library starts to reopen, and now with things online? How can you make families with young children feel welcome and valuable in your library space, whether it's online or in person? And if anybody wants to unmute themselves and talk again, feel free.
Hi, it's Susan from Phoenicia. And I also just posted this to the chat. I'm curious what libraries do to bring in Spanish-speaking or immigrant communities with kids and get them involved in family programming.
That's a great question. If there's anybody who's had experience with that, feel free to speak up.
For us, it's been a hard community to engage, I think, for lots of different reasons.
So I'm not sure if anybody from Kinderhook is here right now, but I know their outreach mini grant, or no, their outreach mini grant last year was partnering with the schools and holding, I believe it was a bilingual story time in the schools. And then providing parents and families with library resources there, encouraging them and inviting them to come into the library. If anybody from Kinderhook is on and wants to speak about that, that'd be great. But I'm pretty sure that's what they used their outreach mini grant for last year. And that seems to have been successful.
One thing that we have been doing is we have a program we call Books for Babies, where we got a grant and some donations, and we put together a bag of books, including bilingual books, but and this is for anybody with new babies. And we put contact information and wrapped up some baby books left it at our local healthcare provider that sees, pediatrician, so that with contact information saying we can deliver more books. And our concept was that as we get known, we would bring books to a household and even model a little bit reading to very young children that a lot of people think are not interested in books yet, but they really are, so.
I think that's a great connection. And it's important to think about community partnerships like that. Like healthcare providers generally see a lot of people in the community. So that's a great partnership right there for getting books into the hands of people who may not be coming into the library. Does anybody else have anything that they want to share, or maybe something that they've noticed in their library that is kind of a barrier for families with young children?
Courtney, we have a couple people who talked about before the shutdown that they encouraged families to meet for afternoon playtime, like a free time.
Oh, that's good.
Just to play together and interact. And Carol says that they also do the welcome bags for babies at the Carroll Library. And Susan reiterated from Clinton that the playtime in the afternoon was really just about play. It wasn't about the literacy effort. It was about the connecting part of it. So it's good things to think about for when you get to open up the library and socialize again.
Yes, one day. But sometimes that free play is super important too, just as important as literacy, because that's when kids can stretch their imaginations and make up stories and make social connections. So it's definitely very valuable.
So Laura is unmuting herself. Did you have something?
Yes, I am from Kinderhook, and I'm not one of the librarians. I am a part-time staff and do more of the circulation desk, but I do work evenings, and that's outreach to our Spanish community, especially by what we did going into the schools. We are seeing a lot more of these families coming into the library, being more comfortable bringing their children into the library, especially because the school does do, at certain grade levels, these projects that require the students to come to the library. So many times the children speak English, parents do not, so we help them and guide them towards the books and things that they need to accomplish, their activities for school and stuff. So we've definitely seen a bigger increase in our population of Spanish-speaking community members.
That's great. It seems like that partnership with the schools really paid off and helped people feel more comfortable. So I think something important to think about is that this webinar was kind of geared towards people who serve families with young children in the library, but that's kind of everyone when you think about it. So just encouraging other staff members to maybe have the same kind of patience and kind of kindness towards young children could be encouraged. That might be something to think about. That's something that came up last year, I believe. Another thing that came up last year that we talked about was how sometimes the access to the children's room is not always the easiest for families to get to. So in some cases, like if the children's room is in the basement and there's no elevator, or if it's upstairs and there's no elevator, that can be a barrier. Not one that's easily overcome without redoing your building, but maybe thinking about ways, if you have a situation like that where your children's room is not easy to access, either moving some things downstairs, or I've seen libraries do kind of like surprise book stacks, where I don't know if that's the right term for it, but basically they put together a collection of 10 or 15 books, and then people can just check them out. And it's kind of like a grab bag, I guess. You kind of get what you get, and it's kind of fun. So that might be something to think about too, is you can have those in an easy to access place.
We have one more in chat, and it's from SPL, so I'm going to make an assumption it's Saugerties, and that they are fortunate to have the Head Start right around the corner, and they do story time with them once a week throughout the school year, and have also done literacy presentations to the parents and the caregivers. So I'm actually wondering, SPL, do you do the story time in your library, or do you go to Head Start and do the story time? They walk over with the teachers, so they do have that within the library itself.
Oh, that's cool.
Hi, Christina from Phoenicia again. We have a couple of small preschools local to us, and I've been for the past, I think this is the 5th year, been doing an outreach program there, where each week I go to one of the preschools and I read a book, and then we have it set up where I bring like a bundle of books that match whatever the theme is for the week, and each child is able to borrow the book with the idea that it comes back the following week and we do another read aloud and borrow another book and sort of just continue it on that way. And that's been a really successful, wonderful program that's been happening for about 5 years.
That sounds fantastic. I have to say, I'm really loving all the community partnerships that I'm hearing about right now. That's just so important for you to think outside your library building and bring people into your library building that may not have been there before. So these are just great. Good job, guys.
Andrew from Beacon said that they do a weekly story hour, obviously before the quarantine, that at their Head Start, but they were going there. In previous years, the kids had come to them, but they had started going to the Head Start headquarters themselves to do the story time.
Very nice. Anything that gives kids more access to story time is great. So does anybody else want to share their thoughts on this? All right. So that's all I have. If you want to stick around and ask questions and chat about any of this, feel free. I'll be here. But if not, I'm sure you all have things to do besides listen to me ramble. So feel free to leave if you're ready to go. If you want to talk or chat and just bounce ideas around, things you want to talk about, we can do that too.
Thank you, Courtney.
You're welcome. I can